Just let people get settled. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Priya Swami, and I'm Curator Globalization and South Asia at the World Museum. And it's my pleasure to chair our second panel, which is called Southeast Asia and Persia. We will hear from 4 speakers today. And our first speaker will be Shakshi Jain, who will be presenting Forged in Fire, the Sikligars and the East-West Evolution of Arms and Armors. Shakti is pursuing actually an Erasmus Mundus MA in managing art, cultural heritage, and global markets across Glasgow, Lisbon, Paris, and Rotterdam. After Shakshi, we will hear from Tiffany Wu, who will present Ghosts in the Garden, effective encounters and subversive presence in Singapore's Ha Par Villa. And Tiffany is pursuing an MPhil in History of Art and Architecture at Cambridge University. We will then hear from Mohammed Faiz, who was presenting Javanese King through European Painter Lens, the portrait of Pakubuana IX in Sasana Mulia, Surakarta, Indonesia. And Faiz is currently pursuing an MA in the History of Art and Archaeology at the School of African and Oriental Studies under the SOAS Alphawood Scholarship. And last but certainly not least, we will hear from Azhar Emami-Padi, who is doing a paper called Framing the Invisible, Landscape as Poetic Space in Persian Miniatures. Azhar is a PhD candidate in art education at the University of Passau, researching Persian miniatures. Without further ado, I would like to invite Shakshi up to begin with her presentation.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Sakshi, and today I'll be talking about Sikligars, a community who are known for making arms and armor in India for a really long time. So yeah, let's start. So before I start, let me introduce you to the invisible hands behind India's gleaming swords and shimmering shields, the Sikligars, a traditional artisan community from Rajasthan, India. Think of them as the behind-the-scenes experts in metal magic, sharpening, polishing, engraving, and etching arms and armor for centuries. In Rajasthan's royal imagination, the sword gets all the glory, but rarely do we hear about those who forged and cared for it. That's where the Sikligars come in. Their craft was essential to India's martial heritage, even though their names were often left out of the museum labels. Today they are still at it, but with a twist. Instead of forging weapons for kings, they now make ceremonial swords for Rajput weddings, replicas for tourists, and Instagram-worthy knives for collectors. It's heritage meets hustle. But here's the catch. While their swords might land in glass cases or on wedding stages, the artisans themselves remain mostly invisible in policy and museum spaces. So let's explore how these artisans are adapting, resisting, and reimagining their place in today's time. Let me take you back to a royal court in Rajasthan. A sword is presented so perfectly polished to a Rana that he could see his own face in the blade. He was so amazed that he gave the artisan a title called Shakalgar. Shakal is a Hindi word which means face, and with time that word changed into Sikligar. But there's more. The name also links to the Arabic word sakal, which means polish, and later, as history turned out, a branch of the Sikh community embraced the name too, aligning it with their spiritual and martial identity, showing how words like craft evolve across regions and belief systems. The Sikligars are spread across Rajasthan, especially in cities like Jaipur, Udaipur, Pushkar, Sirohi, and Jodhpur. Linguistically, they are versatile, speaking local dialects at home, Hindi with outsiders, and writing in both Devanagari and Gurmukhi scripts. Culturally, they maintain powerful rituals, especially during Navratri, when sword dances and worship ceremonies are performed. These aren't just religious, they are acts of remembering, preserving, and passing on identity. Over here, we can see Shyamlata. She is the only Sikligar right now working and practicing the artwork of Koftgiri. And these are the pictures from her lineage that she had. And I think out of all the people I interviewed, she was the only one which actually had some kind of evidence to show that she actually belongs from this community, because a lot of them says they are Sikligers, but their lineage was not like that. They just adopted the style with time. The history of the Sikligers is not linear. It's full of ruptures, migrations, and reinventions. Though often grouped with Lohars, their identity has fluidity. Some trace their heritage to Lord Vishwakarma, the mythical architect, and even to Queen Dida of Kashmir, a disabled woman who rose to power and led guerrilla campaigns. It's often said that they came from the Silk Route, settled to Kashmir, but when Mughals came to India, they had to evade from their place or had to change their religion. So most of them either became Muslim or they ran to the different parts of India, and that's where they come, that they settled to Rajasthan, in Mewar especially, which is Udaipur city today. They settled there because the king of that time knew how much of precious skills they have, and they wanted to have him in his own kingdom. But in the 17th century, Guru Hargobind Sahib invited Sikligers to Punjab through royal edicts. Their weapon making skills supported the militarization of the Sikh community, embedding them deeply in the region's spiritual and political narrative. However, this legacy of martial expertise became a threat under British rule. By the late 1800s, Sikligers were criminalized under the infamous Criminal Tribes Act of 1871, branding as hereditarily criminal, monitored, and denied basic rights. Even after the independence, the Indian government changed that law and turned them into the Habitual Offenders Act. So today, they are part of India's denotified and nomadic tribes, a classification that offers more stigma than support. So the real question is, who speaks for the Sikligers today, and how do we move from romanticizing their craft to truly empowering their futures? But first, to understand the crisis of craft today, we must go back to the 19th century, when colonialism didn't just control land but taste. This is where the East-West dialogue becomes most visible, where aesthetics, commerce, and exploitation converge. British officers, tourists, and collectors developed an appetite for exotic Indian weaponry, but they didn't want real battlefield arms. They wanted decorative, collectible versions. So, what did local artisans do? They adapted deeply engraved damassing, gave way to faster, superficial designs just to meet demand. Simultaneously, the rise of European manufacturing flooded markets with cheaper industrial arms. Handmade swords could not compete. Some were even aged intentionally, recycled old hilts, new blades made to look ancient, and this is what Appadurai called fetishization of tradition, when the look of authenticity sells more than the real thing. Before diving into regional case studies, it's essential to understand how these swords are actually made. There are different parts which makes the one article, and everyone have their own stylization. So first I'll go into and talk about wood steel, which is also called folad in Hindi. This was India's contribution to global metallurgy. Swords made out of this steel were famous for their strength and swirling patterns. It was so valued that it traveled to Syria, alloyed with local ores, and came back as what we now call Damascus steel all over the world. So the East didn't just influence the West, there was a two-way flow of knowledge and material. The next is the most intricate decorative techniques, which is also called koftgiri, also known as tarkashi. It involves embedding softened gold or silver wire into a weapon's surface, etched and annealed beforehand. But it's a game of millimeters. Too much heat and the wire melts. Too little and it won't fuse. The final polish is done with hakik or agate stone. It is mainly seen only in Udaipur city now. I made some videos, but unfortunately because of technical issues, I won't be able to play a lot of them. But I can show that, for example, in this one, I meet Sandeep and Mohan. They are father-son who work in Udaipur, and he was just showing that how he has a gold wire in his hand, and it's really, really soft. So there is a time and temperature to heat it, and if he does it more, then the entire wire melts, and then you have to go back to the jeweler to again make it into a wire. So it's a thing which only an expert can do it today. Now let's delve into the case studies. The next is Jaipur, which is now considered a hub of arms and armor, now is just a one man keeping the tradition alive, Purushottam Giri, a 50-year-old Sikh. He wasn't born into the craft but adopted it out of passion. His techniques are old school: coconut oil, Koran powder, hand tools like the Fernie, and a lot of patience. No machines because machines scratch. But Giri's son won't take it forward. No market, no income. He said, if I get one cleaning order a month, it's a big deal. This is what Bourdieu calls a loss of cultural capital, when skill loses its social and economic worth. So Jaipur's case isn't just about polishing blade, it's about watching memory rust in real time. In this video, he had a spear. He holds it only between his toes, and then he sits and he scratches for 15 to 30 minutes continuously using different tools one after the other. And one can see by the end of 30 or 40 minutes that the rust on the spear has been removed. Now, coming to the Pushkar, so from royal palaces of Jaipur to the sacred terrains of Pushkar. It is a home to the world's only temple dedicated to Brahma, the Hindu god of creation. For local artisans like Raja Khichi, known as the Talwar Master, the Brahma temple isn't just a religious site, it's the lifeline of their livelihood and 150 families of Sikh Leaguers living in Pushkar. His family handicrafts ceremonial swords from Kacha Loha, which means soft iron. That means it's not harmful at all. The men forges the blade and the women design the scabbards. These are not weapons of war, but sacred souvenirs, often purchased by temple visitors who believe the swords carry protective energy and help ward off negativity at home. Raja calls them Brahmastra of Brahma, which mean divine tools from a divine place. The temple's spiritual magnetism shapes the market entirely. Pilgrims buy swords for wedding, offerings, and home altars. Hotels use them in decors, and filmmakers source them for their film sets. They are priced very modestly between 4 to 9 euros. They serve not elite collectors at all, but everyday believers who make them objects of shared ritual and memory. But Pushkar isn't frozen in time. Raja's son took the craft online during the COVID lockdown, launching the YouTube channel, which now has over 1.5 million subscribers. Sirohi is the another city which was known in India for its Foulard swords. It was crafted from crucible steel, which is now a symbolic ghost of its own legacy. These swords, according to oral legends and colonial texts, were virtually unbreakable. Some even said that they could slice through other blades. But that level of metallurgical sophistication, of smelting, forging, and cooling Foulard has now vanished. There's not a single Sikh leaguer today in Sirohi who knows how to replicate those swords in the traditional manner. To be honest, no one knows in the world, maybe one or two, but I can't find those people, so I don't know who does. So Sirohi warns us, if we don't preserve practice, we don't just lose techniques, we lose entire ways of thinking. I know all my case studies were kind of very hopeless because we were like, okay, it's dead in this city, it's dead in this city, but we do have an hope in the last city I found, which was in Udaipur. Udaipur offers us a very different kind of craftscape, one rooted in intimate family networks, but also reaching across continents. Let me begin with Dr. Shyamlata Gehlot, a national awardee and the only known woman in India practicing Koftgiri. For her, the craft is emotional, political, and historical. She has documented oral histories across states, preserved ancestral techniques, and even secured a GI tag, which means Geographical Indication Tag, for Koftgiri in 2023, so that no one can fake and sell those techniques to the people saying that it's original. So there are also artisans collectively keep Koftgiri alive through family-based studios where women make scabbards, sons do sketch-based engravings, and fathers pass down traditional swordsmithing. But Udaipur's story also reflects tension between global demand and local erosion. While artisans export to Germany, Russia, and the Middle East, they battle cheap imitations and the disappearance of rare materials like Foulard. One artisan told me, even if we mix old and new metals, the lightness of sword is gone. That's not just metallurgy, it's memory lost in material form. Yes, they have their own Instagram page where they are trying to showcase their artwork, their skills, to keep the people engaged, to know the people how Koftgiri is actually done. But yet this digital visibility is a double-edged sword. WhatsApp brings clients, but also pressure to lower prices. Instagram opened global markets, but algorithms don't care about tradition. In this video, in the first one, it's just Mohan Sandeep again showcasing me that how different parts of the swords or the Qatar is done by different people. Where in the down one, Deepak, he shows that he's working for a Middle East client because now he don't get money anywhere from Indian clients at all. He says that Middle East wants him to do the koftgiri, but not in Indian style, but in the Arabic style. So he does Arabic inscriptions, overlaying the gold wire onto it, but only for the Middle East client. And this is not just him, it's a story of a lot of Sikh leaders I found who were actually practicing the traditional koftgiri work into it. Now, when we talk about the economic pressures and structural challenges, let's begin with visibility and misrepresentation. In Pushkar, artisans like Raja have been falsely accused in local media of selling dangerous weapons, even though, as I said, they are just making it out of soft iron. That means it's a very thick one, it's not at all blade, and no one can be harmed from it. But in media, they are misrepresented, therefore, it leads to shop closures and police scrutiny. Therefore, he installed a CCTV, and not just him, 150 Sikh leaders in Pushkar as well, in their shops, just to show that they are not selling the actual harmful weapons in their shops. As Dr. Gehlot points out, Sikh leaders are also not listed under India's scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, or other backward class categories. If you are listed under these, you have some benefits from India because you get access to training schemes, subsidies, or legal protection. However, they don't have it. She has a question like, if a 2,000 euro sword, who will use that to kill someone when you can do the same by using a 10 euro knife in your kitchen? Economically, artisans face skyrocketing cost. Sandeep explains that gold inlay work makes koftgiri too expensive for most. What used to be a community craft is now limited to luxury buyers. So artisans are forced to adapt making jewelry or accessories instead. And others use stickers that mimic koftgiri patterns in a day, undermining the months of labor true koftgiri requires. So in this one, what happened is that in the first video, Shamlata is showing that she has two different small swords. But in the first one, it's original silver koftgiri, which cost around 70 euros, and it takes around 5 to 6 days to make it. But you can do the same in 4 hours by only putting a silver sheet over it. You don't have to lay the wire, and that will cost you only 30 euros. And people want cheap work instead of the actual one. And the sticker work won't even last for more than 2 or 3 years, be it silver or gold. It will fade away. But if you will buy an original one, it will last maybe more than 150 years. So this is the thing, and this is just the price for the silver. Definitely gold is very expensive. In gold, they had an issue that the client wants 10 grams of gold on their sword design, but the 10 gram in today's time cost more than 1,500 euros. And with the design, with the time and everything, it costs 2,000 euros. So they want 10 grams, but they cannot pay more than 500 euros. So you can imagine the amount of struggle they have to do to get those clients who really want that work. So that's why they are shifting their work. Instead of now making swords, for example, in my previous video, Sandeep, what he does is he makes now bangles and all and showing koftgiri work into it, because that means he overlay gold and silver wire and turning them into jewelry pieces instead of now making swords. He had to do it to survive. And in this one, in Ramlal video, he just shows that he's an exporter. He's not making in traditional style, but he also has to sustain his family. So he makes very cheap imitation, which costs 10 euros, 30 euros max, and you get really, really good amount of good swords that you can see in the museums as well, but they are just cheap imitations. Well, let's go to the next one. So over here, I'll just talk about the local representations that in museums of India, they are not shown very nicely as well. This is the Jaipur City Palace Museum where they are not represented. But in Udaipur, they have done some work. For example, conservators work together with Sikh leaders when they need to polish or remove rust from their swords. So they work together, and that's, I think, the only example I know where the institutions are collaborating with Sikh leaders. This is again the East-West craft dialogue and diasporic revival, where I talked to two craftsmen who are working in abroad. One of them was Jordan, who came from US all the way to learn from Sikh leaders. Whereas in the second situation, we have Jin Singh, who was Indian, but he went to UK before the partition, and he just had his memory that he had to learn this craft again. And he says that now he works for like BBC, British Museum, and all the different Wallace collection, helping them out to conserve the proper traditional way to conserve Indian swords and armors. And he also says that he can identify when people say that it's a wood steel, that means the actual foulard. He says that he can make 1,000 kgs even now. So the only guy I found who can make foulard, not the traditional, but still trying to mimic it, is just him for now. And then in the conclusion, I will just say that the Sikligers hold more than swords. They hold a form of quiet resistance, a living archive of history, skill, and identity. But unless institutions act through funding, inclusion, and ethical market making, this living heritage risks becoming aesthetic debris. As I argue, heritage is not what survives, it is what we choose to sustain. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. It is 2007 in Singapore. I am 5, and my mother, in search of new ways to teach me about Chinese heritage, learns about a cultural park on the west coast of the island city. We arrive at Pasir Panjang Hill and are greeted by sweeping rows of fake boulders painted a sickly red and yellow. On this rocky terrain looms a sign boasting the park's name, Hopar Villa, and underneath it, Hu Bao Bieshu. A tiger caught mid-roar, cracked and covered in ferns, guards the top of the boulder wall looking towards the entrance of the park, which takes the form of a traditional Chinese archway. We enter and walk up the park's main road. On our left, a view of the traffic on Pasir Panjang Hill and the ensuing harbor is obscured by lush tropical trees. On the right, colorful pavilions and dioramas stand behind a berm made of fake rocks, a permeable boundary interrupted by winding steps and artificial caves that invite us to step into the midst of the sculptures, where I suddenly come face to face with outlandish, animated, and morbid sculptures of characters I had only known through bedtime stories. The White Snake Lady, the Monkey King, and heroes from the water margin all come to life. Perhaps my most powerful memory at Hopar Villa involves standing horrified in front of the park's star attraction, a dimly lit cave featuring spectacular dioramas of the 10 courts of Taoist hell. I witnessed the hell punishments in gruesome detail, human bodies sawed in half, thrown onto a hill of knives, and floating in lava would appear in my nightmares for days after. Later, I learned that this is a common Singaporean childhood experience. Many friends remember being brought to one diorama depicting a man getting his tongue cut off by hell demons, by parents who wanted to warn them against lying. And every conversation about Hopar Villa ends with the same reminder: it's definitely haunted. Not only do its larger-than-life sculptures allude to stories of spirits, gods, and ghosts, but their uncanny and garish visual style also evokes a sense of liveliness that has generated a world of ghost stories, allowing the park to maintain its hold over the shared imagination of Singapore. For those of us who grew up reading Russell Lee's pulp fiction series, True Singapore Ghost Stories, and being told that spirits inhabit trees, this doesn't come as a surprise. But the prevailing image of Singapore is that of a city-state known worldwide for its meticulously pruned environment and rapid economic development. So what does it mean for a haunted, chaotic, eclectic park to exist in the seemingly pristine and ordered landscape of Singapore? My paper argues that notions of haunting complicate Singapore's image as a sleek, technocratic, hypermodern state. The sculptures of Hopar Villa are imbued with presences that invite affective encounters, exemplifying the subversive potentials of haunted spaces to transgress state mandates of modernity. The sustained cultural relevance of Haw Par Villa demonstrates that collective spiritual imagination, evoked through visuality, is central to a contemporary Singaporean identity constantly reckoning with the city's sanitized, rational landscape. Singaporeans know their city as the Garden City, meticulously engineered under the rule of the People's Action Party, the PAP, which has made the equatorial island of 734 square kilometers with a 5.5 million multi-ethnic population into the urban sensation of Southeast Asia. Ever since Sir Stamford Raffles of the British East India Company founded Singapore as a trading settlement in 1819, the city has passed through the hands of several governments. First the British, then the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. The PAP, led by founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, was elected to power in 1959, soon after which Singapore became an official independent state. The PAP has governed ever since. Lee Kuan Yew was a staunch proponent of quote-unquote Asian values, a concept which scripted Confucian virtues of obedience, discipline, and filial piety against Western liberalism, perceived as decadent and disorderly. Lee advocated for an orderly and stable society led by morally virtuous men. This notion of stability in particular has informed both the city's morally charged mandates and organized its urban landscape. Haw Par Villa and its surrounding 1,000 dioramas and life-sized tableau known as the Tiger Balm Gardens stand in contrast to this logic. Conceived and built by Aw Boon Haw, the Burmese Hakka medicine tycoon behind the Tiger Balm ointment, Haw Par Villa's Tiger Balm Gardens first opened to the public in 1937. As a philanthropist, Haw was committed to building a public space for leisure unheard of in 1930s Singapore. As an entrepreneur, he was also interested in attracting visitors to promote his own product, the Tiger Balm. Haw Par Villa's sculptures, made of concrete, plaster, and wire mesh, were created from Aw Boon Haw's personal vision and boasted his fascination with Chinese folklore. Since the 1930s, Haw Par Villa has had numerous afterlives, going through multiple iterations, and in 2015, the heritage tours company Journeys took over management and continues to operate the park today. Now, the park itself is a self-contained environment, much quieter than the urban commotion that characterizes most of Singapore, yet its sculptural program is loud and active. The sculptures promote what scholar Justin Thomas McDaniel would describe as affective encounters through their tendency to overwhelm the visitor instead of instruct. McDaniel describes affective encounters as processes whereby, quote, the senses accumulate images, feelings, scents, and sounds constantly. This accumulation is at once intimate and impersonal. It is the body's capacity to affect and be affected, end quote. It is this liveliness that has led to allegations of haunting at Haw Par Villa, where sculptures, stories, and environments come together to create something that feels fundamentally alive. An often repeated ghost story about Haw Par Villa is that its sculptures come to life at night. The lifelike presence of the park is buttressed by the formal qualities of the sculptures, which convey a sense of action and movement, a prominent example being the massive diorama depicting scenes from the Chinese epic Journey to the West, a 100-chapter novel based on the Tang Dynasty monk Xuanzang, who traveled to India on a quest for Buddhist scriptures. One niche depicting Haw Par Villa's sculptural adaptation of the tale features a battle between the protagonist, Monkey King, and Red Boy, a child deity with fire-controlling powers. On the left, Monkey King's body, including his arm and his rod, is sculpted along diagonal lines that convey movement, while on the right, Red Boy is similarly activated by diagonals, holding his spear in front of him. All diagonals in the diorama meet in the middle of the composition, where the two weapons come into contact. The moment is held in a precarious balance that could be toppled in an instant. Monkey King and Red Boy are on the verge of movement. Elsewhere in the park, figures cross the line from the animated into the uncanny, generating a different type of emotional encounter that ventures into uncontrolled interpretive territories, where the mischievous nature of a particular object transitions into something infused with anxiety and unease. Such is the case when familiar figures like the human body are suddenly made unfamiliar through their rendering in non-human or extra-human ways. In 1970, Japanese scholar Masahiro Mori famously theorized that entities with appearances straddling the line between being somewhat human and fully human, and which thus evoke repulsion and fear in us, sit in what he called an uncanny valley. The profusion of human-animal hybrids in Haw Par Villa evoke the uncanny valley. Surrounding an artificial pond tableau are half-woman, half-sea creature beings, including a crab with a woman's head, a woman who is attached to a conch shell, and a creature with the torso of a woman and the shell of a snail. These half-animal, half-human creatures, displaying seemingly mundane human expressions, are not quite human, thus becoming illegible, uncanny, evoking discomfort and fear. Whether these are conscious aesthetic choices or the unintended result of craftsmanship, these sculptural forms leave a lingering impression that something is always slightly amiss. It is this inexplicable gray area that has become most generative of ghost stories. Adding to the unsettling nature of these sculptures is not only their formal eccentricities, but also their overall material condition, which could be described in many cases as ruinous. Worn out, cracked, and peeling, many of these figures emit a sense of decay and in turn macabre, that perhaps is what gave rise to stories claiming the sculptures are dead humans covered in wax. This element is enhanced by the fact that many of the dioramas allude to morally charged stories of gore and horror. One example can be seen in a diorama depicting a scene out of the Chinese classic, The Water Margin. In the narrative, Wu Song discovers that his brother, Wu Dalang, has been murdered by Pan Jinglian, Wu Dalang's wife. Pan Jinglian has poisoned Wu Dalang after having an affair with another man. To avenge his brother, Wu Song beheads Pan Jinglian, and the sculpture at Haw Par Villa depicts this beheading by maximizing the violence of the narrative's climax. Wu Song's knife is lodged in the neck of his sister-in-law, whose facial features are warped. Pan Jinglian's head is elongated backwards, away from Wu Song. This disproportionate, unnatural form of a human head makes it appear that Pan Jinglian's urgent desire to back away from his knife has literally distorted her features, causing them to stretch back into space. Her effort to escape is futile. Blood flows down from her twisted neck and stains her yellow shirt. Blood also flows out of her mouth, bright red and agape, as if she is caught mid-scream. Pan Jinglian's exaggerated sculptural murder celebrates excess, gore, and mess, qualities that are often erased across Singapore's built environments. Saturated with the animated, the uncanny, and the grotesque, the public park is thus imbued with a subversive force in the context of Singapore, a city where the state demands spaces to remain rational, purposeful, and predictable. The sculpture's ability to evoke laughter, intrigue, fear, or disgust subverts the logic behind how Singapore seeks to plan and manage space. My seemingly secular account of Haw Par Villa outlined thus far, however, yields itself to local ontologies of ghosts in Singapore, which allow Haw Par Villa's sculptures to exist alongside spirits with real presence. Ghostly presences in Singapore are accepted as a part of quotidian life. Singaporeans claim that their city is one of the world's most haunted. The island's rich tradition of haunting materializes in and is partly sustained by the Chinese-originated Hungry Ghost Festival, which takes place during the 7th lunar month each year and marks the return of ancestral spirits from the netherworld. As hungry ghosts, they roam the earthly realm, while the living hold rituals, burn paper effigies, and place food offerings at household and communal altars. Since ghostly presences are capable of entering public spaces, the public space of Haw Par Villa could very well be the dwelling of hungry ghosts. And in the 1990s, staff members treated the statues as hosts of spirits. They would pray and offer incense to the sculptures to ensure smooth park operations, and major events involving the moving or repairing of statues would necessitate religious rites to ensure that the spirit or deity involved is not offended by the disturbance. Altars were set up and offerings would be placed to appease spirits roaming the park. On the other hand, Haw Par Villa's lasting role in the Singapore imaginary is also sustained by a local fascination with the horror genre, which scholars have pointed out is imbued with a politically subversive charge, working to reveal certain inequities that tend to be suppressed in open public discourse. One such example is the Malay ghost Pontianak, the long-haired, vengeful, vampiric spirit of a woman who had died giving birth to a child or who had suffered from abuse. The figure of the Pontianak gained new life in late colonial Singaporean popular films and has remained Southeast Asia's most loved and feared ghost. Scholar Adam Nee states that she is part of, quote, the Asian paradigm of ghostly oppressed young women returning for revenge and, also quote, a figure of female volition outside of usual strictures which the male authority figures feel compelled to unsuccessfully try to contain, end quote. The haunting of the Pontianak in Singapore's cultural imaginary brings vibrant possibilities to how visitors encounter the material space of Haw Par Villa. Now, keeping in mind that, one, the park's sculptures have ontological ties to hungry ghosts, and two, Singapore's favorite and most feared ghost is a vengeful woman who escapes rigid social structures, we can return to Panzing Lian. As China's most infamous adulteress, her bloodied neck and implied scream, which subverts social norms pertaining to propriety and cleanliness, parallel her more literal transgression of virtues of discipline, modesty, fidelity. But at the same time, the violent murder of a woman gains a spiritual charge when situated in both the micro-imaginary of Haw Par Villa and the macro-imaginary of Singapore. In the sculpture, it is unclear if the almost decapitated Panzing Lian is already dead. Her hand still grips Wusong's wrist. Her eyes, however, are blank and verging on lifeless. Unlike Wusong, who gazes firmly at her, Panzing Lian gazes upwards into space. The sculpture captures her in a liminal moment between life and horrific death. In a culture where ghosts are able to roam public spaces in the earthly realm, Panzing Lian's liminal existence allows her to become a haunting agent. It also activates the belief that by virtue of being unjustly and violently murdered by a man, she might be able to return as a vengeful spirit. When read in tandem with the park's connections to traditions of haunting, sculptures of female forms across the park become transgressive agents exerting tremendous affective power. Activated by grotesque aesthetics and a local horror lineage, they're visually horrifying and thereby also spiritually and affectively present, rendering visible a kind of mess and disorder that is often made invisible by the state. Bizarre female forms in the park are unconcerned with the rigid rules that regulate real bodies outside of the park, and even less so with being read in simplistic and orderly terms. Viewers have little choice but to indulge in the horror and discomfort that come with encountering female presences gone rogue. Now, when American sci-fi author William Gibson arrived in Singapore in 1993, he scoffed at its sleek buildings, uncanny pristineness, and chilling laws. Gibson famously named the island state Disneyland with the death penalty. And he wrote, quote, he wrote, if IBM had ever bothered to actually possess a physical country, that country might have had a lot in common with Singapore. There's a certain white-shirted constraint and absolute humorlessness in the way Singapore Ltd operates, end quote. In many ways, this image of Singapore has lasted in both global and local narratives of the state. Interestingly, Gibson continued, I took several solitary jet-lagged walks at dawn when a city's ghosts tend to be most visible, but there was very little to be seen of previous realities, end quote. Gibson was perhaps unaware of the fact that nearly 2 centuries ago, he had a British predecessor. In 1819, when British colonial agent Stamford Raffles called for an excursion to climb the allegedly haunted Fort Canning Hill, local men warned him against it. Raffles scoffed and said, I would like to see your ghosts. Decades later, when the founding father of Singapore was asked about his views on feng shui, he claimed, "I'm a pragmatic, practical fellow. I do not believe in feng shui." And yet, despite dominant narratives that have long surrounded the city-state, Singaporeans past and present have never stopped seeing, acknowledging, and interacting with their ghosts. Haw Par Villa, through its unique sculptural vocabulary and its connections to local lineages of haunting, generate affective encounters that evoke a collective spiritual imagination, which is by nature subversive. Here, even Gibson, who was looking for humor and ghosts, would have found both. Importantly, this counter-reality to the sanitized city-state is a space created and imagined into being, and whose haunting potential is defended by no other than generations of Singaporeans themselves, a phenomenon which reveals a more complicated relationship between Singaporeans and the official narratives of order and rationality espoused by the state. Haw Par Villa is thus not simply haunted. As a space that the Garden City has yet to domesticate, it haunts the reductive but widely accepted narratives of Singapore. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Faiz here, Mohammad Faiz. I'm from SOAS, and also I'm studying history, art, and archaeology, but it's already mentioned before. So it was a pleasure to talk here in a place that I used to read and watch in a really far away in the other corner of the world. I would like to present a painting, a tile painting. It's an interesting painting that I saw during my projects in a mansion in Surakarta, one of the most important cities in Indonesia, but still kind of unheard of in global settings. The title itself is Javanese King Through European Painter's Lens, the portrait of Pakubuwono IX in Sasana Mulya, Surakarta, Indonesia. So for a brief history, Surakarta is a kingdom in Central Java that was founded in 1745, and it was established by Pakubuwono II in 1745. It's a typo, sorry. After the treaties of Giantis in 1755, it split into two. There are Surakartas and there are Yogyakartas in the other half of the kingdoms. So under the Dutch rule after the Java War in 1825 to 1830s, their territory is diminished into areas of South Poland. It grew rich due to sugar plantations and because of the trade between Java and the world, especially to Netherlands. And at the left is a map of the city itself. The square tiles plan is the palace. So I would like to give a context of the setting itself. It's a French mansion. It's still inside of the palace. It's still inside of the fort. It was the mansion name itself Sasana Mulya, which means the honored place. It was built in 1811 during the rule of Pakubuwono IV. Before the reigns of Pakubuwono XII, it was named Dalam Ngabean, which means the house of Prince Ngabehi. Also, there are 4 tile paintings. There's the paintings of Pakubuwono VII, Pakubuwono IX, and the consort of Pakubuwono IX, which is Ratu Pakubuwono, and other is Pakubuwono VIII. However, I will focus on these paintings, these tile paintings. Like we see, the painting is a tile artwork made of ceramics. In the painting, Pakubuwono IX wears a military uniform with an ikat, a type of headdress that I use, but it's more sophisticated than what I use. So he wears an attila decorated with gold ornaments and collection of badges on his chest. He holds a sword with his left hand, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Under him there is a rock with blues and gold colors. He is depicted in a palace with pillars decorated with floral patterns and capital with the lions and lotus ornaments. The palace is painted in gray and gold, as you can see. Checkered black and white tiles are also illustrations on the palace floor. In the background, a vague image of a towering Gopuram is present. That's what we see at the background. So I zoom it, and we see this is not clearly Japanese temples like we see like in Prambanan or in Borobudur or such, but itself is Gopuram of a Tamil temple in South India, which is raises some questions. Why is a Tamil actual backdrop used to depict a Japanese king, which is like an ocean away? It's not the same place. Was the artist unaware of the distinction between Tamil Nadu and Java? So, well, these presentations will explore how Orientalist imagination influenced the portrayals of Pakubunan IX's, contextualizing it within border colonial and artistic paradigms. So yeah, the brief story of the painting. So I found some newspaper regarding of the progress of the paintings since researching or recording data in the palace and the Netherlands is impossible due to financial constraint and some difficulties in terms of administrative things. So I only find some material from online, like Delphi or other like Leiden's universities, libraries, sites. So so what I see is that I think it's here. So what I see is that there are two two watermarks of both the manufacturers and the artists. The above is the artist, which gives me a hard time. Who is this? Like the name is really difficult to decipher. And after several times, after asking and such and discussing, so it's actually Daniel Harking, who is an artist in NV Haksje Platilpakeri Rosenburg. As we see, there's a Rosenburg names in it. It's in Den Haag. But its name is Rosenburg. It's a different place. So and then we also see several stories behind it. So yeah, it's actually was made, or actually at least we see the newspapers of it 5 years after the death of Pakubunan IX. Thus it is a posthumous paintings or paintings of someone who already deceased. It is said that Prince Aryo Mataram, as the envoys of Sunan Surakarta, visited Rosenburg Platel Bakery with his son on 1898. It was from Algemeen Handelsblad, 17 May 1898. Previously, he had ordered the Rosenburg factory to produce a full-size paintings of the Susunan on tiles. The painting was commissioned to adorn Surakarta Palace, which actually not in the palace, but actually it's in the mansion, but I think it's another discussions. The painting was displayed on the Rosenburg factory warehouse for like 10 days. On the windows say the Dagblad van Zuid-Holland and Gravanje newspapers. And then essay is also, it was exhibited on the Paris World Exhibition, but it still needs to be more verifications of that. Well, what we also know is that here, Rosenburg was manufacturers quite well known in Dutch artist history, ceramic history, I believe. But it was based in Den Haag, was founded by German Willem Baron Wolf van Gutenberg, and it was known as for its high-quality ceramics, and it was sold all over the world, including Paris, Berlin, or even Batavia, or known as Jakarta, and also Batavia, Surabaya is another significant cities in Java. But sadly, during the First World War, Fatih Bakri Rosenberg stopped productions in 1916. Like, that's the photos of the manufacturers. And then also the artists. It's never quoted as his works in the internet, but I think it's at least we know that another work that he made is in another side of the world in Java. So I think it's kind of added some information to it. So he was born in 1862, died in 1953. Hired as a draftsman by a carpet factories and attended the Academy of Fine Arts in Den Haag from 1879 to 1882. And then he entered Rosenberg in 1883, and then resigned in 1900 due to artistic conflict. And then he just go to hold Zuidholland pottery factories after that for like 24 years. Well, although he excelled in art, there's no record mention Harking ever visiting the East Indies or even here Java or even India. So this might be the reason for his limited of knowledge of the East. It's one of the examples like beautiful, but it's really different from quite a gloomy example that we see in the paintings. So yeah, it's kind of interesting how contrasting his some of the work that associated with him and that. So, well, yeah, I think, well, to understand deeper ideological implications of Pakubun IX portrait, I think it is also important to approach it not only as a decorative artwork, but as visual text shaped by colonial worldviews. Like Edward Said's ideas of Orientalism is pertinent to this context, I believe. Said describes Orientalism as a style, is a so-called based on ontological and epistemological difference between the East, Orient, and mostly the West or Occident. It is not limited to academics who have written on the East, but also to the artists who illustrated the East. Orientalism also created distorted views of the East and reaffirmed Western superiority. Said stated that the portrayals of the Orient then appears to be a constrained area, a theatrical stage attached to Europe, rather than an unrestricted extension beyond the well-known European world. Well, I also quoted to Nida Nochlin in one of her works, The Imaginary Orient. She agreed that the production of Orientalist painting has little to do with ethnography. Thus, another important functions of the Pistorus, especially in its Orientalizing form, is to reinforce the idea that the people it represents are different from, as advanced than, and culturally inferior to those who produce and enjoy this image, which is peoples in Europe, but in this case it's the Javanese itself. They will always be other. She gives examples of Jean Long Jerome and Eugene Delacroix, who, even though they use photograph as reference for their paintings, produced anachronistic works lacking temporal change. In fact, it's kind of not really like how it's supposed to depict. The examples Nochlin gives may be from North Africa and French, but are still relevant to Harking's painting Pakubun IX. So Jerome's and Delacroix, they mainly painted the Orients and mainly from North Africa as such. Harking has a similar vision of Orient, even though not extreme as Delacroix, which kind of a bit pejorative as such, but they're not going to mention that painters create their own meanings in their paintings, embedding an Orientalist reality. Part of the strategy of Orientalist paintings like Jerome's was to make their viewers forget that there was any creations at all to convince them that works like these were merely reflections, scientific in their currency of a pre-existing Oriental reality. Jerome suggests that the Oriental world he made is a world without change, untouched by historical process that cause sufferings or improvement, but at least drastically changed Western society at the time. A larger tendency to blend different cultures into a single homogenized image of the East is reflected in Harking's depictions of Pakubuwono IX. Knoxlin's observations of Occidental and Oriental art frequently erases historical and cultural specificity to create a romanticized and static visions of the Orient is consistent with these misrepresentations. He might never know if the temple he used for the reference was only popular in South India or even only among the Tamil community. But he might only don't know that there's such the types of Japanese temples which different from the Tamil archetype one, which I'm sorry I forgot to put in the presentations. Harking created the reality that Pakubuwono IX was a king in a faraway imaginary Indian kingdom rather than Java. Harking's notions about East did not really exist in vacuum, but was the product of its time. The idea of Indonesia as part of the greater India was popular in 19th to 20th centuries. India is thought to be the center, while Indonesia is only the periphery, which also includes Java, Sumatra, and or also other Southeast Asia countries like Khmer, like Cambodia and Thailand and such. Like we see is in Alfred Fuscher or Kumaraswamy, who view further India or mainly Southeast Asia as Indonesia as the continuum of India and a passive preceptors of India's high cultures. And also Alfred Fuscher, a French scholar, argued that India was the centers and cornerstones, while considering the island of Java in the Netherlands Indies as only an Indian colony, which is not untrue because we are an active recipients. Several academic institutions centered on the studies of civilization of Great India emerged, such as Institute Kern in Leiden by Jean-Philippe Vogel and Institute Civilizations of Indian in Paris by Zifran Levy. And also Dutch architects like Charles Profels Wolf Schumacher rejected the notion that ancient temples in India ancient temples in Java were built by a Japanese, but rather by South Indians. So he compared Japanese and South Indian temples and racial phenotypes, and he argued that the Japanese could not build such monumental structures. This view not only saw Java as part of the age India, but refused to believe that colonized subjects could build their own civilizations. Well, in the conclusions, the king is positioned within an imagined Orient that conflates Javas and Tamil Nadus or even South India, even though Harking's paintings of Pakubuwono IX does not overtly portray him as an inferior. The Orientalist propensity to generalize and exotize the East, making its subjects seem other, is best illustrated by these portrayals. Harking's reinforced colonial era ideologies undermining Java's cultural uniqueness by portraying Pakubuwono IX as a ruler in a fanciful Indian setting. Thus, the portrait of Pakubuwono IX embodies the prejudice and assumptions of its era, serving as both an artistic artifact and a historical record. It emphasized the importance of critically analyzing colonial representations, the intricacies of cross-cultural interactions, and the long-lasting influence of Orientalist philosophy. And this is the main hall of the house. Matur nuwun. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. My 2 cents. Oops.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present. My talk today is titled Framing Invisible, Landscape as Poetic Space in Persian Miniatures. Persian painting has never approached landscape as a separate genre to be viewed from distance. It does not isolate nature as an independent visual field, nor depict trained for optical realism or naturalistic accuracy. From early manuscripts to elaborate Safavid court epics, the natural world remains inseparable from narrative, effect, and compositional rhythm. A tree in this tradition is not neutral. It bends with sorrow or leans with longing. A rock is not drawn to mirror geological structure, but carries the weight of patience, separation, or presence. Nature is part of painting's expressive vocabulary, an active participant that breathes with the figures. This presentation proposes that Persian painters conceived landscape not through observation, but through symbolic meaning. Their trains do not show what the world appears to be. They give form to what it feels like, structured like a poem, layered like memory, and choreographed like ritual movement. Nature here is a system of signs, not just decoration. To understand how this visual language differs from dominant global models, especially those shaped by European Enlightenment, we examine two ways of seeing. One grounded in mimesis and rational perspective, the other shaped by Persian poetic thought, metaphor, and theological presence. This is more than style. It marks a deeper divergence in visual thinking, requiring a different grammar of interpretation. We now turn to these two visual sensibilities. In European art history, the landscape gradually emerged as an autonomous genre. By the 17th century, artists like Claude Lorrain redefined nature as an independent, atmospheric, and formally composed subject. His seaport with Embarkation of Queen of Sheba, 1648, exemplifies this shift. Landscape ceases to be a passive backdrop and becomes the central focus, framed and claimed through perspective. This painting reflects a Cartesian way of seeing, where the world is known through geometry, light, and proportion. The landscape becomes a secular space, defined by empirical logic, detached from the inner life and made available for contemplative viewing. The natural world is measured, not inhabited. By contrast, Persian painting from the 13th to 17th centuries integrates landscape not as a separate category, but as a medium of narrative and emotion. Manuscripts like Varaqa and Gulshah, 1250, reveal space unfolding like verse. Hills rise in measured rhythm, trees bend in effective motion, and birds hover in symbolic stillness. The visual field is shaped not by optical perspective, but by poetic and expressive logic. Here, a flower blossoms not through a botanical process, but longing. A garden wall signifies emotional nearness rather than physical boundary. The composition conveys interior resonance rather than external form. In the Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp, every element, from jagged cliffs to winding rivers, follows Ferdowsi's very famous Persian poet, poetic rhythm. Landscape becomes not a view, but a voice. The visual language is powerfully expressed in Bahram-Gur, Pins the Coupling, Anagers, painted by Mir Sayyed Ali, for the Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp. Here, the landscape is an active participant. Earth contours echo the Hans pulse. Stylized vegetation synchronize with figures, executed in opaque watercolor and gold. The image conveys emotional rhythm and symbolic form, rather than spatial realism. Nature is composed with poetic intent. We now turn to deeper origins of this grammar, a history where nature was always constructed as meaning, not merely observed. The history of Persian painting does not begin with the landscape as an autonomous genre, but with the image as vessel of cosmological meaning. From its earliest phases, Persianate visual culture conceived nature not as a mere scene to view, but as a symbolic order to interpret it. Works such as Mani's Arjang and Menekian fragment from Turfan, 8th century to 9th century, present floral cosmograms, schematic, celestial and theological rather than representational trains. Following the Islamic conquest, figural imagery returned in illuminated manuscripts, maintaining nature's symbolic role. The Seljuk, era, Varaqa and Gulsha, 1250, exemplifies poetic flatness, where the gardens serve as an allegory rather than an environment. Space here is arranged according to emotion and text, not measurement or mimesis. By the early 14th century, the Jamiu Tawarikh, this one, which backs to Ilkhanid period, 1307, shows sustained engagement with Chinese Shen Shui models. Misty diagonals, axial trees, and voids appear. Yet these forms are reconfigured. Empty spaces becomes a rhythmic pause, not atmospheric depth. Trees function as structural signs, not botanical studies. This recalls Fan Quan travels among mountains and streams, where vertical monumentality reflects metaphysical order. However, Persian landscape remain planar and narrative, preserving allegory. During Timurid period, especially in Herat, this visual grammar matured. Behzad, which was a painter of this one, Behzad infused terrain with rhythmic narrative cadence. Hills arc like a speech, trees lean like gestures. This style influenced Mughal court art, evident in albums like the Muraggah Gulshan. Early 17th century, with its modular train and lyrical spacing. Under the Safavid dynasty, the tradition grew complex. The Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp aligns landscape with poetic meter, choreographing train to support literary rhythm. But the later Safavid period, however, a shift occurs. Painters such as Ali Kuli Japadar reflect the emergence of Farangi Sazi school. This is a Persian name, but in English could be like European style. incorporating shading, modeling, and theatricality drawn from European sources. These changes introduce new visual priorities, a spatial construction, dramatic lighting, and descriptive emphases, which contrast with earlier symbolic structures. And it was only with Qajar artists, such as Kamalul Mulk, that Persian painting began adopting European landscape models. Works like Bagh-e-Shah or The King's Garden, late 19th century, reveal geological solidity, linear perspective, and single light sources. Now that we have laid the foundation, we turn to two examples from the museum collection. This case invites us into a space both intimate and exilic, the wilderness surrounding Majnun, the archetypal mystic lover. His limbs draw inward, posture collapsed, gaze beyond the visible. Around him, trees lean, cliffs tilt, and the sparse land neither offers refuge nor demands clarity. Yet in Persian painting, sparseness is never voided, is a field of potential. Like the poem that informs it, the composition communicates metaphorically with that. The landscape becomes emotional architecture. Rocks embody sabr, endurance. Trees signify longing, and space itself stands for separation, not only from Layla, his lover, but from the world. Chinese motifs resonate here in rhythmic rock layers and sweeping earth diagonals, but their functions transforms. What once structured spatial depth becomes cadence for feeling. This is not imitation, but translation. Nature is written as a visual language of inner states. The landscape does not frame the figure. It speaks for him. Compared to Nijan Rangshi's studio, circa 1372, both works use absence to shape interiority. Yet where Nijan's brush renders Selated as a poetic retreat, Majnun's desert express Selated as metaphysical rupture. One shelters emptiness, the other wounds. Both signify distinct ways of being alone. The desert is neither scenic nor topographical. It is metaphysical. Majnun is enacted. The land performs him. This is not wilderness as place, but as a state of being. Here the landscape becomes a sensorium, shaped by affect, not perspective. Stillness becomes sacred, a timeless geometry of distance, a more delay of longing. From this charged stillness, the next image moves us not further into exile, but forward a shared difference center. In this Qajar era image, we leave behind Majnun's solitary exile and enter a space defined by sacred orientation. The Kaaba is not depicted as a three-dimensional architectural form, but as a cosmological axis, still, centered and encircled by concentric rings of movement. There is no horizon, no vanishing point, no atmospheric modulation. The image rejects linear perspective, offering a vertical viewpoint, not to create a spatial illusion, but to affirm devotional orientation. It's not a depiction, but an evocation. The viewer is invited to align with this axis from above rather than observe from a human position. At first glance, the composition recalls Chinese bird's eye views from the Ming Dynasty imperial scrolls like Xingming Shangtu or Complete Map of the Capital, where the elevation structures civic harmony and ritual procession. Yet here, elevation serves a theological purpose. The Kaaba as Qibla or Qibla. No matter where Muslims are in the world, they turn toward the Kaaba during their daily prayers. And the Kaaba as Qibla organized not only space, but the image itself. All lines converge, all motion is circumferential. This landscape is cosmographic, not scenic. Meanwhile, this image reflects the growing influence of European. This third one is European, but I had a mistake, sorry about that. First, I will start with the, okay. This landscape is cosmographic, not scenic. Meanwhile, the image reflects growing influence of European visual culture in 19th century Qajar era. Bird's eye city views, architectural plans, religious centers, such as those in Civitas Orbis Terrarum or engravings of Rome and Jerusalem, become a widespread layout and centralized composition bear this imprint. Yet, as Najib Oglu observes, Qajar artists reconceptualized Western compositional forms, redirecting them toward metaphysical and liturgical ends. Unlike European cityscapes, where elevation implies mastery and surveillance, here elevation signals submission. The gaze circles rather than dominates. The image demands alignment rather than distance. From this center, we return not to narrative, but to a structure of vision itself. Not what we see, but how we see. Let us return, not to the frame, but to the gesture within the image. Persian painting never treated landscape as a genre. It is not a depiction of place, but a choreography of meaning, a gaze that moves, not across depth, but through rhythm. A tree leans not in realism, but in sorrow. A rock endures not with gravity, but with grace. A desert expands inward toward the heart. This ethos is clearest in the Bagh, the Persian garden, which you can see example of this. Enclosed geometric, irrigated, yet inviting movement, a visual field not to be surveyed, but interned like a carpet. It is designed for motion, to be walked, paused within, or turned around. The viewer becomes a participant. This logic is captured in tamasha, Persian words, means seeing in motion, a mode of seeing that blends presence with motion. It is not passive observation, but embodied perception. One sees not from fixed point, but through steps, breath, and proximity. The Persian image withholds totality and demands movement. A painting is not to be judged from distance, but to be inhabited slowly. Meaning arrives through approach, not overview. This is a landscape tradition distinct from both European and Chinese models. Claude Lorrain offers illusionistic depth, Fan Kuan evokes sublime verticality. But Persian painters like Reza Abbasi or Behzad offer something quieter, a visual ethics, not to master the scene, but to dwell within it. Not to represent the world, but to feel it. Between Wajnun's exile and Kaaba's center, we encounter not two images, but a visual philosophy, a way of knowing shaped by patience, inwardness, and poetic rhythm. The landscape here is not a window. It is a threshold between exterior and interior, word and image, presence and perception. Not a conclusion, but a passage, like the garden gate, modest, but resonant. To read not with the eyes alone, but with footsteps. To dwell in vision, not as spectators, but as companions. To see not with distance, but with tamasha, like stepping into a Persian carpet or garden. Woven not merely to be seen, but walked. Thank you.
Can I ask the speakers to come to the front and stand here? Thank you. Oh, I left my pen up here. I'm horribly aware of this thing on my face, so it feels really funny. We wait for Faiz. Perfect. I want to thank you, first of all, for some really wonderful papers that I think spoke really beautifully to each other. I have some questions and some way to connect, but let's see if there's anyone in the audience who would like to open up. Okay, we have someone at the back.
First, thank you very much for all of the very interesting topics. I have a question for Mohammed. So I have two questions actually. So first one is I want to ask is who commissioned that portrait and who paid for that? If the Indonesia said they were not so happy with this portrait, could they say no? Say, oh, we don't want it. This is first question. The second question is how we see the difference. I mean, is for the Dutch craftsman, perhaps he is lack of the knowledge of the Asian culture. He doesn't know what's the difference between the Indian culture and Indonesia, perhaps. So, but how we see the different? The mistake is due to his lack of knowledge, or he has simply a kind of a deliberate Oriental list mindset. This is my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Well, the one who commissioned it is the palace itself. I mean, the Surakarta's kingdom itself is the kingdom that the king is that was depicted there. Sadly, due to like the closings of the libraries of the palace, it makes it difficult to know the records from the palace itself because it's there are some conflict between some factions in the palace. So we didn't know like how the palace or the kingdom's perspectives of the paintings. So even though I would say there might be some conflicting things between the prince and and the sultan or the king that are reigning at that time, because it's already a different king. It's the Pakubuwono X. And the one who picked the order is actually the son of Pakubuwono IX, which is basically his brother. So there's a change. Might be Pakubuwono X might be, actually, I don't want this, you can keep that, and then just keep to their house. But it still needs to confirmations, because we still need to find some of the evidence, both in Indonesia and in the Netherlands, but because I have a financial constraint, I cannot really research in the Netherlands back then, because it's need visas and accommodation and such. Also, wait, what was, I'm sorry, but what was the second question? Mm-hmm. Well, okay. Well, most likely because it's like it's a conventions between like the publics at that times, and I would say I never seen a record that Harking ever visited the East, or even he studied it before because of lack of studies. I would say, yeah, it could be because of his ignorance, because he doesn't know how the East looks like, and maybe it's not really his brother's work, so he just makes something that in an imagination of the East that I tell before, like it's like the Indies. So Indonesia back then was called Netherlands Indies, or Dutch East Indies. So they might mistaken with the Indies, like the British Indias. That's like my 2 coins, but it still need more verifications, of course. Maybe it could be because of his ignorance or because of the Orientalist approach. Thank you. Is it answering, or is it okay?
Is there another question from here? I saw, I saw you walking, so I thought you were answering a question. Okay. So, what I picked up in all of your presentations was kind of a conversation and an engagement with a methodological form of resistance, that everyone's kind of reading a little bit against the grain in their work, or trying to resist how things have been done before to try and come up with some new insights, which of course is a really brilliant way to do things. And you're all doing it in very different ways. And, you know, in Shakshi, in your work, of course, that resistance comes from the very subject matter you're working with, the community, the Sikligars themselves, resisting by still practicing their work. Whereas Tiffany, you're thinking about a built environment and resisting the dominant narrative, the dominant socio-political narrative that the built environment kind of gives you. And what, Faiz, what you were just talking about around Orientalism and thinking through why this could be the case. And Amar, I think, pushing for a different kind of visual language. I want to know, and I think it would be interesting for everyone to know why this kind of strain of resistance has shaped your research and your research question as you've come forward, because it's a very particular stance to take. And just because I am a South Asianist, I'm more familiar, I think, with your context, and I understand a lot of the socio-political implications of working with and through the communities that you work with. So there's a lot of bravery and risk-taking that's also involved. So I wonder if we could just start by reflecting on that, so then centering yourself and your position in your research as well. Who wants to start? Either any one of you can start for me.
I'll start then.
Yep.
In my research, the thing was that the notion I had of what Sikligers do before I started my research and after I met them was entirely different. Because I used to work at the City Palace of Jaipur and I saw a Sikliger who used to polish a spear, I thought that's what they all do. But while I traveled, I realized that's just a 1% of part of it. They used to do kovkiri, they used to make blades, they do engraving, etching, and those are different parts of it, but it's the same community who does it. So that was a larger section, and while interviewing with them, the pain I saw was in all of their videos that the Indian government doesn't support them just like the other craft. Like we have handlooms, we have these craft association where the other craft skill artisans are called in. But when it comes to Sikligers, they are not called into because even now they are still considered under the under the Criminal Act tribe, which was put out by the British East India Company. So I feel that right now, being as a researcher and doing this entire thing, the resistance is there, but I just want that at the end, maybe while doing these kind of conferences or meetings with different museums, maybe they can start collaborating with them and show them to the public that what they do, because the only institution where I saw them doing it publicly was just the Udaipur City Palace Museum. That's it. So yeah, that's the change that I think we should need to focus on and how that the craft skills can go on. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Somebody else? Yes, please.
Well, actually, for me, it was about Eurocentric perspective about Persian art, because in our, from Indigo's perspective, painting is completely different things that European think. So it was very interesting to me to just come into this area and work in this field, because as a Persian, I think it is really important to, I have some knowledge, I mean, the literature, language, and so on, but I think I have this responsibility to also, as an, not I am not art historian for now, but maybe in the future, to transition this knowledge to others in this global art scene. That is really important to, to have some exchanges about each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. At least for me, to be fair, I don't really have that flowery answer for why I want to do such things, to discuss about these paintings. As for myself, it's actually part of my, well, back then I have a project in that place. It's a conservation, but I'm making a preliminary report before going to the conservations. So what I see is that as simple as at first I already know that there's a painting there, but I didn't know that it's a child painting. It's a not really discussed subjects, especially in Indonesia. So and I think it might be interesting to delve into it a bit longer, and I hope it might ignite several discussions later, especially there. It's after that I kind of found out that it's actually not the only tile paintings that depicts anyone in Indonesia that made from or from anywhere. Unlike that made for you, but Indonesia. There's also another examples in Kutai, but it hasn't been written yet. So I think it might be because of curiosity for me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think my project definitely started by considering kind of the repertoire of these sleek, hyper-modern images that are coming out of Singapore that the state uses to shape itself, but also has in many ways cemented the Euro-American imagination of Singapore as a place. And kind of wanting to go against that, continuing a conversation with a whole lineage of scholarship that looks at the politically subversive potentials of haunting and haunted spaces and informal spaces. And so I think it is kind of wanting to push back against, in a way, stereotypes or essentializing tendencies that have been shaped both outside and inside of the state with kind of the interior. There are many much more tangible stakes for people who are being regulated, controlled through a built environment. Considering that, but also I think a lot of the methodology that I try to use or look towards also pushes back against prevailing methodologies in the field of art history and the field of religious studies or area studies, as they call it. And I think part of it is that I do believe that when you're looking at art or material culture in a specific area, I want to honor kind of the ontologies and the local epistemologies that have been used either by its original founders or by the local public to understand or to interact with these sculptures in my case. And so I think that's why I take very seriously the idea of, ghostliness or haunting or a spiritual presence that I think in more, empirical methods might often get neglected. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you all for those answers. Do we?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that we have to round up so that we can take a little break and move on to our next panel. So please join me in thanking this fantastic panel here.
So hello. We have a break.